Hello. For the special occasion of the Fourth World Taste and Smell Day, I would like to tell you a little bit about taste and smell illusions. This is one of my favorite topics because it's pretty much the closest thing we can get to a little bit of magic in science. So, my name is Maria Veldhuizen. I work as an associate professor in psychology in Turkey. I'm also the chair of the leadership team of the Global Consortium for Chemosensory Research. In my laboratory, we study the perception of taste and smell, particularly in foods. And so, in my lab, you might find all kinds of colorful lemonades that you can taste. This is not something that should be done in any other type of laboratory, but in my lab, we can. So let's talk about an illusion. And one of the famous illusions that you have probably come across, for example, on social media is the Muller-Lyer illusion. So I want you to pay attention to the green section of line. Now, when the arrows are pointing away from each other or when the arrows are pointing to each other, that will change how long the line seems. So the line on the left in green might seem shorter than the line on the right when the arrows are pointing away from each other. But as you can see in the bottom of the screen, those line sections, the green one and the black one in the horizontal part, are equally long. So this is an example of a visual illusion. Another illusion that you might be aware of is that of a ventriloquist. So this is an amusement artist that holds a wooden puppet on his lap, and he animates that puppet. And with his hand, he can make the mouth move of the puppet, and by only slightly moving his own mouth, he will make a different voice than his own voice. He will make a voice of the puppet, and it will really seem like the voice is coming from the puppet, even though the sound is really coming from a different location in space, the artist. So this is another example of an illusion. So illusions, what are they? So in an illusion, there is a percept that arguably differs from reality. And studying these types of things can help us understand how the brain creates a representation of the physical world. And more importantly, or not more importantly, but also importantly, they are often fun and surprising. Like I said, a little bit of magic. So we have to talk about a little bit of basic biology to understand what's going on in some of this taste and smell illusions. So how do we even taste something? So let's take a look at a sugar molecule, sucrose, that looks like this. How, when that enters our mouth, how do we taste something? How do we become aware of it being sweet? So one part of that complicated biological process is that there are these proteins inside the taste buds, inside the cells in our taste buds. So when, for example, a sugar molecule enters your mouth, it will travel into a taste bud, and there it will encounter such something that is called a receptor. This is a bunch of proteins together in the membrane of a cell, and when a molecule like sugar binds to that, the shape of that bunch of proteins changes a little bit, and that allows for chemical changes inside the cell, which will then allow for signals to travel up to the brain. Now, this is all very complicated, and a way to think of it more simply is by thinking of the taste as a key that is inserted into the receptor, like a key is inserted into a lock that then can be opened up. Not everything will activate that receptor, only the key that fits. But there could be multiple keys that fit, for example. Now, let's take a quick look at the uh, where such biological processes are important. So here I created a picture, an image of a head. And so this is, you should imagine that this is a cross section through the head. Here you can see the tip of the nose. Here are the lips, and here's the tongue. Now what I want you to see here is that behind the nose there's the nasal cavity, and at the top of the nasal cavity there are receptors. And also there is the oral cavity, and for example on the tongue and on the roof of the mouth there are also receptors. So um, uh, if you sniff a nose, volatile molecules will travel into the nasal cavity and act as the key in the lock of olfactory receptors, of odor receptors. And if you put a piece of chocolate in your mouth, sugar molecules will act as the key in the lock of taste receptors. So from this explanation, you might think that if receptors in the taste are in the nose are stimulated, we will perceive a smell, and if receptors in the mouth are stimulated, we will perceive a taste. Now, this is not always the case. Reality is much more complicated than this, and the illusions that I'm going to show you will demonstrate that. So the first thing I want to talk to you about are a couple of interesting taste illusions. And for example, we can have taste after images. So imagine looking at a bright light, then the light is turned off, and then you will see a dark after image in your visual field. So we have something similar with taste. So we tend to think of water as being tasteless generally, but one interesting thing that can happen with water is that if you rinse your mouth with a lot of pure water, then after you stop rinsing, you will perceive a sweet taste, even though there is no sucrose in your mouth binding to taste receptors. How can this be? Another interesting example, I think, is from um, something that is called thermal taste. So what can happen is if you warm up the tongue a couple of degrees higher than body temperature, then you can also perceive a sweet taste. So warming the tongue without actual sugar being in your mouth can also lead to the perception of sweetness. Now, these are both examples that you should not try to do at home, and also would be really hard to try to do at home. But one thing you can do in a lot of situations is find a fruit that is called miracle berry. And this fruit, as the name says, has something very surprising about it. So the fruit looks like this, and you can chew it and eat it, but it has not really much of a taste of itself. And but the interesting part about miracle berry is that if you then after bite into, say, a lemon, that lemon will taste sweet. Um, and so this happens for anything sour that you might eat for up to about 1 hour after you eat a miracle berry. Now, what happens in this case, again, the lemon does not have enough sugar in it to make it taste sweet normally. But what happens in this case is that the miracle berry molecules bind to the sweet taste receptors, but they don't change the constitution of the protein under normal circumstances under a neutral pH. But what happens if there is an acidic environment, then that key will turn. And so that is why a lemon that is sour and acidic will then taste sweet all of a sudden, because the sweet taste receptor gets activated. So what can we learn from these illusions? Well, the first thing is that sweet taste can occur without a key inside the lock. That you can think of the receptor as something that is not passive, that it has perhaps a baseline activity that can be adjusted due to other factors, and that an increase in baseline activity from a relative inactive state itself can lead to a sweet taste experience, explaining some of these illusions. Now I would like to talk a little bit more about other receptors that we might find in the mouth. So in the mouth, we can find taste receptors. We already talked about that. But in the mouth, there are also, for example, touch receptors. Now, what's also important is that the oral cavity is connected to the nasal cavity, and that when air travels from the mouth to the nasal cavity, for example, after swallowing a food, then there can be smell receptors or odor receptors in the nasal cavity also activated from something that is in the mouth. So knowing that there are all kinds of other receptors in the mouth, we can also observe some other interesting illusions. So this is something you can also do at home. What you would need to do for this illusion is to prepare a sugar syrup. So you can just dissolve some sugar into water, and also have some regular water ready. Now you're going to take 3 Q-tips or swabs that can hold a liquid, and you're going to dip the outer 2 into the sugary water, the syrup, and the middle one you're going to dip into regular water. Then you're going to stick out your tongue and you're going to move those wet swabs across your tongue. So start from about the middle of your tongue to the tip of your tongue. And then pay attention to where you're tasting sweet. Now, usually people will then perceive all 3 swabs to be equally sweet, even though only 2 of them have sugar on them. And in this case, we say that touch captures taste. Lastly, I would like to show you another illusion that you can do at home. To prepare for this illusion, you should get some candy. It would be good if this is a candy that is relatively soft and easy to chew and swallow. So let's say a gummy bear or a jelly bun or something, but not hard candy. So what you're then going to do is you're going to first pinch your nose, and you're going to keep your nose pinched until later on when you're not going to pinch it anymore. So pinch your nose, put the candy in your mouth, but keep your nose pinched. Okay, you're going to chew that candy a bit, and you're going to pay attention to how that tastes. What do you taste? So at that time, you will probably taste sweetness because that candy usually has sugar, and it may also be a little bit sour. Then you're going to chew it until you're ready to swallow it. And then when you swallow it, you are going to release your nose and breathe out through your nose. And then you're going to reevaluate what do you taste. At this time, you're probably going to taste whatever fruity flavor is in the candy. This might be lemon, this might be strawberry. And then you realize that what we call taste is often smell, because you cannot perceive it until the volatile molecules reach your nasal cavity and bind to the odor receptors there. Now, there is a study, a scientific study, that shows something related to this, which is my last illusion that I want to show you. And in this study, they had 2 tubes that they inserted into participants' noses. So here you can see an MR image of someone's head, you can see the brain, and you can also see here the nose and the mouth. Now, one of these tubes ends in the front of the nasal cavity, and the other tube is inserted to the back of the nasal cavity. Now you can push air through these tubes, and they push the odorized air through these tubes. And so in yellow you can see how the volatile molecules on the air, when it's pushed through the front tube, will travel across the nasal cavity from front to back. While if air is pushed through the tube in the back, if you push air through that, then the volatile molecules will travel from back to front. Now, when they pushed the same odor through these tubes in air into people's nasal cavity, they asked them, where does it feel like the odor is coming from? And pay attention, this is the same odor. So in both cases, they were presented with, for example, chocolate odor. And then when the odor was presented in the yellow route, people would report to sense it in their nose, while when it was presented in the blue route, people would report that they felt it in their mouth. So what can we learn from these last illusions? So what we call taste is often touch or smell in reality. And this is And why does that confusion happen? Well, probably because all these percepts usually go together. We have taste, touch, and smell usually at the same time when we eat something, and they always come from objects in the mouth. So it makes sense that they get confused. And then it also is that way because this helps us to learn about foods and nutrition in our personal environment. So if you want to read more about the science behind these illusions, these are QR codes to the papers that I took these examples from. And if you want to see this demonstration again for you to try, I will also be uploading this presentation to my YouTube channel that you can find here. I would like to thank you for your attention, and I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me, and I hope you enjoyed a little bit of magic in your day.